So I went from basically refusing to read self-help books and having read 3 in my entire life to having read 3 dozen of them in the space of under 2 years. And I've realized there is a danger in them that is not the main danger that I think people who are critical or skeptical of them would pick up on, which is that generally they have an audience in mind, and either they're not clear because they don't recognize that this is the audience I'm writing for, or they just assume the audience will recognize it themselves. And so I wanted to talk about 4 cases where I took the wrong lesson from a self-help book, and it either set me back or at least frustrated me before I figured out, oh, this is what is going on. And I think the critical thing here is, as I mentioned, I read syntopically, and I'm comparing these books to each other. I'm also comparing them to my own experience, and I'm realizing they often contradict my own experience. They often contradict each other, but there's usually a reason, context-wise, for that. So I wanted to talk about these 4 books and what I misunderstood and what I understand now. So I mentioned in previous videos that I reread this book because I wanted to check something for a future video, and this is that video. And what I wanted to check is what he actually had to say about craftsmanship. And the reason for that is that my takeaway was that craftsmanship meant doing the absolute best you can every time. And actually, my takeaway on rereading it is more that what he is saying is craftsmanship is doing deliberate practice to get better and better at what you're doing, but then doing like considerably below your maximum level for mass production. And that was, the second part was kind of implicit and I wasn't picking up on it, but I'm realizing that is the critical factor I was missing. And so I ended up, like last year, after I got laid off, trying to do these projects, and I got too bogged down in getting back into my old habits of perfectionism, in part because of misunderstanding what Cal Newport was saying about craftsmanship. And other books on this topic have emphasized the important thing is done is better than done right, or even done very well, much less done perfectly. But I only realized this now, and it was after I'd already finally really started doing the iteration that, oh, I misread what he was saying about craftsmanship. And then this next one, Adam Grant Originals. So he has this story in here about this woman in the military who doesn't get taken seriously until she does some stuff that, as I interpreted it, I was struggling to do, which was basically paying your dues and like prove you can be hyperproductive on an implementation level. And it's possible I misunderstood what he was saying, but also the military, even though it's big and bureaucratic, is more big and bureaucratic than corporate America. And what I really should have been doing is focusing more on the high-level stuff. And that was really eye-opening, is when I was hitting the likelihood I would be laid off, is I was talking to my coworkers and they all appreciated the high-level stuff that was easy for me and I was not thinking was important, and was focused so hard on trying to do better at the implementation stuff, which has never been my strong suit. And I probably still would have been laid off, and it's probably a good thing that I was laid off in the long term. But still, if I had been focusing on trying to get better and leverage what I'm actually good at, if I'd understood that was what my coworkers valued, I might not have got laid off, and certainly my last year or so would have been less stressful. So that was me misunderstanding this book, which is still overall a great book, and most of what is in this book is more consistent with how I was operating. I just seized on the one thing, that anecdote of the military woman, to take the wrong lessons. And then this next book, I actually stopped. I haven't finished this one because I think it was a couple chapters after I read it, but I couldn't get out of my head one thing she said. I think she actually said this in the first chapter, and I got halfway through, but I just could not get out of my head that she was saying that people are much better at getting things done if they do them for their own sake than if they do them as a means to another end. And I'm like, well, that has not been my experience at all. And what I'm realizing is I think there's 2 things in that. One is that there is a difference between being in survival mode versus being in thriving discover mode. And you want to be thriving, you want to be in discover mode. But in survival mode, yeah, it is very hard to do things unless they are the thing you want to do at the time. But the other thing is I think there's a difference between setting prerequisites versus steps to an actual goal. And I'm going to talk about that in a future video. But those are at least 2 things that I think the advice she was giving is definitely right if you're in survival mode, and also definitely right if you're treating it as a prerequisite. But the critical thing is, if it's as a step to part of a larger thing, then yeah, that is actually worth having the larger end goal. And then the final one, this book, I read it and I'm like, oh wow, I'm already pretty clearly 7 of these things. 4 of them I'm but I couldn't get there, and I can see why. And then the very first one is fast. And this is the one, this has sort of been a double whammy for me, because the very first chapter is fast, and the way they explain it is almost everyone they hire gets back to them within 12 hours, and they shortlist people who respond on LinkedIn within like a minute or two. And I'm looking at that, and I'm very confused, because I'm like, you don't want to hire someone who's hanging out on LinkedIn and going to respond to every message in 2 minutes. That goes against the other 11 things in this book. But it was in my head when I responded to an email from a recruiter, which honestly, it's probably a good thing I didn't get that job, because what I'm trying to do now, I probably would have had a non-compete agreement if I had gotten this job. But it was a job I was very qualified for. I had just read this book. The fast thing was in my head, and I'm like, I have to get back to her within 12 hours. And so I responded with an email that showed it to a friend, and she's like, you didn't do anything wrong, but it's a little autistic, and often recruiters are kind of normie women married to engineers who like people they can control and aren't going to surprise them, and you are not like predictable in the way like an engineer is, and they want someone more predictable. But then the other thing is that because I was like, okay, it was wrong about fast as it presented it, I was much more dismissive with other books of the importance of being like super fast and being iterative. And I only finally broke through that start of this year. And I've known it in the abstract, but because the way they present it in this book, I think, is bad, it took me way too long to actually realize, oh no, it actually is important to be fast, and that actually should be the first thing. And I don't know if it's because this is a professional headhunter for high-level executives, and obviously executives are going to be a little bit different and more focused on shallow things. And then it also might be, these are just the metrics he could explain, but not necessarily the ones that they follow when hiring. And so that one was sort of, again, double whammy, because I missed that job. That, again, probably a good thing, because now I can do the thing I'm trying to do. But also, it then put me off actually being fast and iterative to some degree. And then there's one other example, not from a book, but my mother would tell me the story of Michael Kittredge, the founder of Yankee Candle. My mother was one of the first employees at Yankee Candle, not like the very first, but like first hundredest, I think. And she was their second lawyer after the first one quit, and he referred her, as I recall. But anyways, so she would talk about his story, which is that she went to high school with him, with Mike Kittredge, founder of Yankee Candle, and his story was supposedly that he made these candles out of crayons just for fun, and people liked them, and then they bought one, and so he bought more crayons, and he made more, and Yankee Candle grew out of that. And I don't know if that's true or not, but the problem with this is that is not how most businesses, even most consumer-facing businesses, start. They don't start from, you're doing something fun, and then people are like, I'm going to pay you for that. And that, thinking that was how things worked, I think is one of those things that held me back. And so that's not a book, that's a story, but it's sort of a similar thing that it's taken me a long time to actually figure out, oh yeah, Mike Kittredge, even if that story is true, most companies are not going to get founded the way Yankee Candle was, where it's someone doing something for fun and it becomes a huge business that lets you retire in your late 20s. Anyways, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Magpie, and I'll see y'all in the next one.